segue then on the RBA, if you will. The Deputy Governor gave a speech to the Economic Society of Australia's conference, the Australian Conference of Economists.
Yes.
He gave a talk and he outlined. So I've got a question for you at the end of this.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you saw my message to you, giving you 5 minutes warning of this question. But so they outlined the three big challenges facing Australia, the Australian economy at the moment, and the slowdown in productivity was one of them. And the second one was sort of geopolitics and the tariff situation, especially with Trump being quite unpredictable. And the third one was climate change. And I got to say, I look at the three of those. I think productivity, absolutely, yes, that's the big shining star, the bright neon flashing light. Trump's tariffs or the geopolitics, sure, you could include that. I mean, it's going to be relevant. I wouldn't include it in my top three, but I don't think it's silly. And then climate change, I just think it's a stupid thing to include, unless you mean the stupid overreaction of politicians to climate change. But I don't think that's what he meant. So that was his three. But it got me thinking. It got me thinking about what my three would be. And I've got three penciled in. But before I say anything else, Gene, what would your three be? You're the Deputy Governor of the RBA. Congratulations on your promotion.
Oh, thank you.
You're giving a speech to the ESA. What are the three economic challenges that Australia has to somehow navigate?
Well, I would say, I think the general, the lack of productivity growth, the malaise related to that, I think, is the excessive growth of social services, the challenge of restraining or keeping the NDIS to a reasonable rate of growth. I mean, they're targeting an 8% rate of growth, which is still just, much faster than all other government expenditure, much faster than nominal GDP growing, say, at 5%. So they're basically just committing to the NDIS ever expanding in real terms. So I think they're all related. I think that's one issue. I would say the challenge of providing affordable housing for people. I think we've really just failed younger generations. I mean, and that doesn't just mean Gen Zs. That means millennials and some Gen Xs, right? I think we've failed them in terms of having affordable housing. And there's a lot of issues there. There's supply side restrictions. There's also the fact that the federal government completely lost control of immigration coming out of COVID, 550,000 in 1 year, which is just insane. I mean, should never have happened. Complete dereliction of their duty. And that was both, that's not necessarily this current government. I think that's the previous government too. I think it must bear some responsibility. So there's that. And then finally, I would say, I agree with you about the overreaction. I think the high cost of energy, which is threatening some of our traditional industries, and now we're talking bailouts. The government's going to have to subsidise a lot of these smelters to keep them open because of policies that are misdirected, misguided, in my view, in the absence of an international agreement, a real international agreement that's going to force China, that's going to force India, that's going to force the United States, the European Union to take proper measures to reduce emissions. I can't see any real benefit in us going alone in the absence of any firm international agreement. So they would be mine. I'd also throw in another, but it may not be economic. I think social harmony is a huge issue at the moment. Peter Curti at CIS, so big shout out to Peter. I think he's doing some great work on how do we have a core belief now in Australia that unites us when we're no longer a society with that comes from the same cultural background. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that was that was the best thing for us. I mean, I think we need to embrace. I think with other cultures, it's good to have a mix in the community. And I mean, we want to be a welcoming country, but the challenge now is how do we do that? How do we live together? How do we not fight each other over conflicts in other parts of the world? So I think that's a huge challenge for us as well.
Yeah, no, Point taken. I think I almost included that last one, and then I chickened out and picked more economic. Although my third one is going to sound not very economic as well, but when I get to it. But just picking up on one of the things you said there about the climate change and the climate change, lack of an international climate change agreement. Now, I hesitate to give advice to people who I disagree with, and I think the whole thing should just there shouldn't be a climate change policy. I don't think it passes a benefit cost test. And I note, by the way, that this is a segue on my own segue, so I apologize in advance for this. But for people passing climate policy, I'd encourage them to this. When you put down the climate policy, it should be required to indicate how much you expect this climate policy to change temperatures. Mm-hmm. Because I think if they actually wrote down the benefit, I mean, they're doing a benefit cost test, and the benefit is some vague, we're going to save the universe, look at Greta Thunberg, and then, there'll be no cost. We can just do it with taxpayers' money, and that's free. The benefit cost analysis being done here is atrociously, it's just non-existent, right? They don't do it because they know what the answer will be. But let's get a little bit closer, right? The benefit is presumably less climate change. How much less? Write it down. Right? Make all the mainstream assumptions. I don't mean go and get Ian Plimer to do the assumptions. God bless him. He may well be right, but take the IPCC estimates and tell us, all right, we're all paying more for energy. We're being told we can't drive these cars, or we have to, shut down this industry, and you can't have too many cows. All right, so there are costs. What's the benefit? Write it down. And they won't write it down because they know the honest answer is that these policies, which do hurt people, the benefit will be it slows down warming by about 3 hours by the year 2100. Or their temperatures might change by 0.001 degree, or some ridiculously unnoticeable thing. And so if they admitted that. But anyway, let's put that aside. So I think the whole thing is nearly all climate policy is bad policy, in my opinion. Having said that, now I don't want to give them advice they might take, but it seems to me self-evident that if you were as scared as they say they are, the correct policy is not for Australia to act unilaterally or act before the curve. The correct policy would be to pass legislation today locking us in to make all of these changes if and only if X number of foreign countries do it. This does two things. It binds us to do our fair share of an international agreement if it ever happens. We lock it in early. But it actually increases the incentive for India and China and Indonesia and the rest of the world to actually do so, right? Because we won't hamstring ourselves unless they hamstring them. We lock it into legislation. The whole thing can only be addressed if you get India, America, China, and Indonesia, Brazil on board.
Yes.
So the only policy that matters is how do you get them on board? And the only thing we can do there is to have an if-then piece of legislation. And so that just seems self-evident to me that that's what you do if you are honestly scared and trying to fix the problem. That's what you do. So we'll see if anyone actually does that. I suspect that they're not doing that because that's not what they're really motivated by. But we will see. Anyway.
Oh, everyone's terrified. I mean, people are legitimately worried about it, John. So they think we've just got to take emergency measures now. And so look, I understand where they're coming from. I don't share that view myself, but I think I can see why they come to the conclusions that they do. I mean, even if policy-wise, rationally. But they're not. I don't think people are having an emotional reaction to it, or they're scared, they're worried about it. They're rather than thinking like the cool-headed, rational, calculating economist. That we are. So I think that's the difference.
I agree to some degree. I think a lot of the voters are making an emotional decision. That's just true across the board. Voters, let's be honest, the vast majority of voters don't sit down and do an economic PhD to study the economic policy and a sociology PhD and a health PhD they dissect in depth all of the consequences of all the policy. That's not how anyone votes. We all know it. People vote on the basis of a vibe, right? So yes, I grant you that a lot of voters are just basing it off the vague fear campaign they remember from school. But the policy makers, why aren't the policy makers suggesting a if then? They've got to know, right? They've got to be aware that just blind emotionalism and emoting and overreacting isn't a proper policy setting. Everywhere else, they do a benefit cost analysis. Why aren't these hard-headed bureaucrats that can, be very meticulous when they need to be? Why do they suddenly forget that now? So I agree with you. A lot of people sitting at home, like the people reacting like shrieking teenage girls running around, my hair's on fire, my hair's on fire. I agree. They're acting emotionally. but I don't think that gets the bureaucrats and the heavy hitter boffins in Canberra off the hook. They would either do an if then, or they're motivated by something else. That's the options I can see.
I guess they work for the government of the day. I remember, I mean, it turned
other way around,
quickly.
Gene. Other way around.
What's
the government of the day works for them. I think the government of the day works for the bureaucrats, but that's a different topic.
Okay, yeah. But I remember how, like, up until that Al Gore film, the Australian government position was that adaptation made most sense, right? The costs of mitigating, I mean, maybe you do a few things that were easy, that were low-hanging fruit. I mean, the whole land, some measures regarding land clearing, but otherwise it was going to be too costly. We're better off just adapting. But then that Al Gore film came out, what was it? The Uncomfortable, Inconvenient Truth. And everyone just freaked out. And we're having the G20 film, not the G20 film, the G20 finance ministers meeting in Australia in 2007. And so there was pressure then to have climate change on the agenda. And John Howard even set up the commission to look into an emissions trading scheme. Peter Shergold and then Martin Parkinson went to work on that, and things. Then we had Rudd come in, so things changed very quickly. It was extraordinary. I think a lot of it was that film. A lot of it was this emotional reaction. Yep. Anyway, we should probably talk about Tobin tax. Go ahead.
We could. Oh no, wait. So having taken a deviation, then a deviation on the deviation, allow you to give me my three.
Yes. Okay.
So two of them are the same as yours, right? I did have them already written down before you, but two of them are, so one, productivity, right? So you, me, the RBA, we all agree that if that's not fixed, we are in for serious problems in the coming decades. And we're not on track to fix it, so you should be worried. And I put housing down as a second one, because I think that is like a legitimate big neon sign flashing issue that we should be. And then my third one, I played around with a few different options, but stick with me here. Fertility. The fertility rate.
Okay.
So it sounds like a weird one, but I think I've said this to a few people. I think this is true. When people look back at the history of time long gone, they don't remember every nuance of every detail. They won't remember every single one of our live streams, Gene, much to their eternal shame. You remember a few things, right? So if you remember that, the 11th century, what was that? Oh, the Norman conquest of England, right? The 5th century, the fall of the Roman Empire. There's only a few things you remember. And I think when the 21st century is remembered, people go, 21st century, that was the year where population started collapsing, right? I think we're not going to be remembered for terrorism or climate change. They seem very big to us now, but we will be remembered for, that's when the population of the world started imploding.
I mean, it could,
or
moderating. I mean, falling from, it's going to get up to 10 billion, isn't it? Something around 10 billion, and then it's going to start declining. But then, I mean, who's to say where it ultimately ends up? I mean, we don't know what future fertility trends are, although perhaps it is going to remain below replacement rate in advanced economies. Perhaps that is a well-established economic and demographic phenomenon. I don't know.
I think something will change, but that something is going to be such a big change because the ultimate solution to this is that a lot of traits we have, a lot of our political and religious traits are genetic, right? And if that's true, and it is true, then the future belongs to whoever has kids, right? So there's going to be a natural solution, which is the sort of people who hold philosophies and religions and political views that are associated with low fertility. Those views will die out. That's why, woke has a built-in, suicide pill built into it. Woke people just don't have kids. So that mindset will die out. That's going to take a while. This is going to take generations. And who comes out the other end could look like a very different group of people with different philosophical, political, and religious beliefs to what we understand today. So that change is still going to be monumental, right? So also, we might not even make 10 billion now because all the demographers are still underestimating the collapse in fertility. Fertility is down to 1.5 in Australia now. You need about 2.1 or 2.05 to sustain your population long term. I've got a little graph here, and this has only just started showing up this has long lags. We talked about the RBA, 3, 6, 9 month lags. We're talking about 30, 50, 60 year lags for when this kicks in. But once it kicks in, it seems almost unsolvable by policy. But here's just one little example of what we're looking at here. This is the natural growth in population in Australia. And you can see it was pretty consistent for 120 and then got up to about 140 and then for a bit 160. And now we're down around the 100 mark. And it's only just started kicking in for us, right? So this trend is going to snowball, right? It's going to become a bigger and bigger change going forward. And we've started to see some discussion about some of the consequences. To his credit, Peter Costello brought in the intergenerational report, released supposed to be every 5 years, to tell us how the aging population is going to impact on public finance. And so we've been kind of looking at this issue of an aging population for 20 years. And every time we look at it, the conclusion, I think, if people are honest, the conclusion is terrifying. We can't afford. So your point before about the runaway social spending, look, to some degree, I have no inherent problem with the idea of social spending, ensuring that people can get help and better healthcare and all that sort of stuff, cheaper healthcare. But the way it's done can destroy countries.